This happened 7.5 years ago, June 23rd, 2016, while I was cleaning out my house. I was renting a house for a year, and the year was almost up. I wasn't going to be living there for the next year, so it was time for me to start cleaning out and moving my stuff to the next place. The house that I had at the time was fairly small, but plenty of space just for me. I lived there by myself, and I had just finished cleaning out the living room, other than some basic furniture, and I had to move on to clean the kitchen. There were quite a few cabinets, so many that I didn't use a good number of them. I was looking in some of them that I didn't use to make sure there was nothing I had in them. One of them I opened up, I saw something in the back corner. It looked like some type of shirt or rag. I grabbed it and saw that I didn't think it was mine. But when I moved it, it revealed a small white lever that you could barely see. The cabinet was in the corner by the sink and halfway blocked by the stove. I thought it was just another pipe, but it just looked a little different to me. I got inside and had to crawl into the cabinet, which was pretty large. Once I got inside, I saw that there was a small trap door to the side, leading into the wall. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. You had to be completely inside in order to see the details of it. I decided to open the door, which led to an extremely narrow hallway with a sort of crawl space. But when I go further inside, I'm horrified. I start seeing that there's food and several blankets, as if someone has been living inside there. The good news, at least to me, is that whoever was in there was gone. I tried to make sense of it and figured how long the person had been there and how I did not know about it. I was gone from the house with work and a lot of other stuff, but I didn't know how it would be possible for someone to live in there without me knowing. I continued cleaning until it was pretty late, and the next day after work, I continued. I was still kind of in shock with finding a secret room in the house, and decided to look at it once again. I opened the cabinet and went inside, then I pulled the lever open just like the previous day. But this time, as soon as I opened it, I saw movement, and then I saw a person for a split second. They slammed the door shut on me, and I immediately turned and ran all the way out of my house to my car, then called the police. I was so scared that I started driving away as well. I opened up my phone, told the police the whole situation, and they came to my house a short time later to find that whoever was in there was now gone. I was absolutely disgusted knowing that. This random person had access to my house for who knows how long. It felt like a vivid nightmare I needed to wake up from. When I opened up my phone to call the police, it showed the date was June 23rd, 2016, and I still remember this date 7 years later. It stayed with me like a scar I didn't know I would ever heal from. Luckily for me, I moved out the next week. I don't really know how long the person was living in my secret room, but thankfully, it never gave me a problem. Thanks for reading my true horror story. As someone who has already experienced things like home invasion, I would suggest that you always lock your doors because you never know what people can do when they are in your house. It was early 2020 and I had just gotten a new job in a small town near my area. While looking for a place to live, my sister offered to rent her house to me. She had bought the house 2 years prior, but her and her husband didn't really take to it as their commute to work was way too long, so they moved out and the house was uninhabited. Luckily for me, it was actually pretty close to my workplace, around 40-minute drive, and my sister pretty much rented it to me for free. I just had to pay for water and electricity and look after the house. I was living there for a solid 2 to 3 months and had already gotten used to it. One night, after coming back from work and parking my car, as I walked towards the door, I noticed something odd. There was a cigarette butt on the curb to my house. I leaned down to pick it up, thinking it might have been one of mine, since I'm a smoker, but after looking at the brand name, I realized it wasn't mine and just threw it away. I didn't think much of it and just shrugged it off as some asshole throwing it on my curb. I went on with my night and nothing unusual happened. 2 days later, I was once again walking to my house when I spotted more cigarette butts, this time near my porch. Needless to say, I was pissed off and thought someone sat on my porch and smoked, but since I didn't know who they were, there was nothing I could do about it. I noticed that they were put out pretty recently, so it was probably someone who walked off as I was approaching. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop, and it was pretty late, past 1 a.m., so I was surprised when I heard a car passing by. It's a suburban neighborhood, but it's during COVID time, so people rarely ventured out at night. I didn't think much of it. Around a half hour later, I was surprised when I heard chattering nearby. I listened intently, but I couldn't hear what they were talking about as their voices almost seemed muffled and quiet. By this point, I was getting a bit unnerved, so I stopped the movie and quietly got off my sofa. I walked to the front door to make sure it was locked. As I was approaching the door, I froze mid-step as I heard the two approaching my porch and reducing their talking to a whisper. I realized right away that whoever this was wanted to break in. I leaned against my front door and waited, expecting a loud bang against the door or the doorknob to be shaken, but it was oddly quiet. I decided to walk over to the window to see if they had walked away or changed their minds. My windows have bars on the inside that you have to unlock so you can move the curtains or look out the window comfortably. I slowly unlocked the bar mechanism and lifted up. I moved the curtains and was taken aback. Leaning up against the window was a man. He was as startled as I was because he basically started over his steps and jumped back. He tightened his hoodie to cover his face, so all I could really see was his big blue eyes looking at me. His friend realized what was going on and right away started kicking the door in. He kicked it a solid 4 to 5 times, but the door wouldn't budge. All the while I'm staring at them frozen in fear and trying to comprehend the situation. I snapped out of it and slammed the bars to my window, locking them, then running upstairs to the storage room where I pushed the table up to the door and called the cops. As I listened and expected the two men to come inside any minute, I heard a loud crash and the bars from the window being shaken aggressively. When they realized they couldn't get in, one of them let out a long, angry scream that probably woke up the whole neighborhood. By the time the cops came, they were long gone. The police couldn't find out who it was, but were more active in the neighborhood in the following weeks. Regardless, I wasn't too keen on staying there, so shortly after I moved out. My sister sold the house a few months later, and as far as I know, nothing similar ever happened since. I honestly don't know what they wanted or why they were so determined to get in, but whoever it was, let's not meet again. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old, and our apartment was on the 4th floor walk-up unit. Very typical low-budget Chicago rental in a changing neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter to the story. Our building had about 12 total units. Mine and the 3 below me had a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a second entrance. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to the rear gate, which led to an alley. From the front stairwell, there are windows on each landing to the back porches, so you can see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through the window. We had good relations with our neighbors, especially those who lived directly below us and shared a front door. This was the thing that saved all 3 of us, my partner, my dog, and me. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or weeks at a time, and it was a scary thing for me because I was SA'd and stalked by my ex in my teens and 20s. I always worried something would tip him off and he'd start stalking me again. A little less than a month before a 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy Facebook message from my stalker ex from yet another account. About a week after, all my cars were broken into, the glove boxes were emptied, things were thrown around, but the only thing that was taken was a bag of dog treats. I had about $20 in change in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money. I was on high alert at this point, and very scared about the time I'd be alone during the tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation and felt that it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to be a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't direct threats. And truthfully, car break-ins are common in Chicago. It's happened to me like 15 times, and police usually do reports over the phone and don't even come out to the scene. What I found really strange was that the thief didn't take the money. There was a homeless man who had started camping on the boulevard nearby recently. My partner left for his tour, and I set up cameras and bought door braces for the front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea, maybe because she was picking up from my stress level. It meant I was taking her down 4 flights of stairs for her to go blast her bowels out 67 times at night. I had this distinct, prickly crawling sensation of being watched whenever I would take her out, but I couldn't tell what was genuine and what was my own fear and paranoia. Her diarrhea lasted an unusual long time, like 3 or 4 days. I was going in and out from the main door a lot, feeling very scared, and I noticed some of my neighbors wouldn't pull the door all the way closed so the lock would engage. I mentioned it to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of my stalker. He was supportive, said that he'll mention it to the other neighbors if he saw them, and I noticed the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and about 8:30 a.m. that morning, my first neighbor's place was burglarized. He was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and lived alone. I guess he went out for breakfast and left the door unlocked. While he was gone, someone had come in, eaten his leftovers in the fridge, took a coat and a pair of boots, took his college diploma, but left the $500 in the same cabinet. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs, but did take a set of keys. The keys were to the same first floor apartment, and the master key to the front and back gate. My neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second floor neighbor said, "Go tell No Donut because she has a stalker." So my metalhead neighbor came up to let me know what happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked on my front door. I jumped out of my skin, but looked through the peephole, recognized him, and the 3 of us stood in the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, about 15 to 20 minutes. While we were talking, we heard the front door open and close below us, but thought nothing of it. Then we saw a man climb up the back porch steps to my back door through the window. There was no other apartment that he could be going to, and he had walked past all 11 more accessible units on his way to mine. He was not my stalker. I did not recognize him, but the image is burned into my mind. He was wearing flashy black and white high-top sneakers, not the ones stolen from downstairs. His coat was oversized and hanging off his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window, and he froze halfway up the stairs to my porch. He slowly took out his cell phone and called someone as he slowly turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs in artificial slow motion, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, and bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below mine. My neighbor ran downstairs, dialed 911. My partner ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out from a sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floated out the alley. We didn't get the plates, but the cops said it wouldn't have mattered. There wasn't a crime committed and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually called them and has the police report. My partner and I were considered witnesses. For a long time, the thing that scared me the most was the tool that my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood cut to about 2 feet, but about 6 inches of it had been made into a handle. It was like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was, but I'm pretty sure it was to ram the door jambs and locks. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been repaired. like it had been broken open before. It seems like they used the master key to place the ram, get someone at the back door to catch me if I tried to run away, and they'd break in my front door and go forward with whatever they planned. When we caught them, before they could catch me unaware, they seemed to abort the plan. I suspect they'd been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured I was alone. It was a pure coincidence that my partner had gotten home 30 minutes before this. I feel we all could have been horribly injured, or worse, had we been trapped inside and they had gotten the jump on us. Nothing else ever came of it, except my landlord refused to change the locks, but he did agree to let us out of our lease. I moved out of Chicago, and now I have added a younger dog that I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights and wingnut neighbors, so whoever was on my back porch and whatever they had planned, let's not meet. This happened last night, November 15th, 2023. It was about 3:30 a.m. I was in my living room chilling on the couch, watching grown-ups. Suddenly, I heard someone outside fidgeting with my doorknob. My heart literally dropped. I immediately grabbed the knife from my TV drawer that I kept there for that exact reason. As the doorknob is still fidgeting, I fucking bolted upstairs. I grew more terrified because you could easily break the glass on my door and enter my home. Keep in mind that I live in a low-income area, and I myself are low income. There's no security cameras. I live in a small 2-story loft. There's no other doors to barricade in. My upstairs does not have a door, it's just an open area. I dial 911. The locks are still making noise. I'm on the phone for maybe 10 minutes, whispering as loudly as I could. This person is still trying to break my locks. I can literally still hear the sounds in my head. I don't know if he or she was actually trying to pick the locks or just trying to spook the shit out of me by moving the doorknob like that, because suddenly I could feel the person trying to push the door in, but the door won't open. I couldn't see outside because I was too scared to open the blinds. At this point, my heart is racing. The operator says cops are on the way. I start hyperventilating. Finally, the fidgeting stops. I stay inside and upstairs. I look out the window and I see nobody. I can't really see at all because it's so dark. Cops show up later and ask me if I'm on drugs, but I'm actually completely sober. I had a basketball game, so I didn't partake in any substances that day. Keep in mind, I drink lightly, sometimes heavily, about 3 times a week, but no weed or anything else, and I've refused to take a sip ever since because of how spooky this was. I feel like I owe it to myself for staying on my toes. Anyway, back to the story. At this point, I'm shaking. They do a perimeter check and just bounce. No fucks given. They suggested I do not stay there that night. They said next time, try to get a good look at the guy. They said he could have been homeless, thinking that the house was vacant. But how the fuck could it be vacant when you hear Adam Sandler in the background? I was watching a movie in the living room, for God's sakes. Someone was trying to harm me. It's so scary to think that if I was drunk or something, and I didn't lock the front door, there would have been a random person roaming in my place. I ended up having a major panic attack when the cops left, and I faint. I go into this weird shock faint. I literally don't sleep the whole night. Once the sun comes up, I go outside. I notice that there's trash all over because of the stray cats that got into my trash can. I go to pick up the trash and I start to think, could one of the cats been doing this? I mean, I've seen videos where they try the doorknobs. Then I start to think, could this have been another animal? Maybe a crazy person? But then I think about what person would raid your trash can and try to pick your locks. I start thinking from a paranormal standpoint. Then I think, the locks. The cops didn't even really check the locks. There's honestly no evidence or sign of any picked locks. There's tiny scratches on the wall, but nothing that would indicate the locks being fucked with. More like someone tried to stick a credit card in, but nothing was out of place. I start to think, Was something or someone just fucking with me? Like as a joke? Not even trying to get in, just playing a weird ass mind game with me? Was this some type of visitor or something else? A fucking ET? I mean, come on. At this point I'm just paranoid, right? Some motherfucker was trying to get into my home. I'm spending a few days at my mom's house. I'm so fucking spooked. I haven't slept in more than 46 hours. I'm a relatively happy, lonely 23-year-old guy, I guess you could say. My mental health isn't the best, but I've never been diagnosed with anything. I mean, what are we talking about here? Do you think it's possible that I could have experienced auditory hallucinations? Is there any chance that I actually might have been deranged to where I think someone was actually attempting to break into my home? I usually don't post shit like this on Reddit, but I feel like this is a good place to vent. Fuck it. Maybe someone has an encounter that's similar. I'm still pretty jarred from this experience, but I figured it would be easier to share about it than to keep dwelling on this. A couple days ago, someone broke into my house while I was sleeping. I work night shifts, so sleeping during the day is something you learn to get used to. Around 6:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was a loud knocking sound that was coming from outside, and my dogs were absolutely ballistic. For reference, I live in a farm out in the middle of nowhere. My closest neighbor is a half-mile away. But back to the story. I somewhat wake up, but don't really think about it since my neighbors like to shoot their guns, and this is during hunting season. As I start to fall back asleep, my heart started fluttering weird, like I knew something wasn't right. That's when I heard loud footsteps throughout my house. The dogs are still barking, but start to quiet down. That's when I really begin to worry. When I think my dogs would protect me in a time like this, fat chance. The footsteps stop on the other side of my bedroom door and don't move. I think this is how I'm gonna die, and although I had a weapon in my room, I couldn't really get it without being heard. It felt like an eternity before the steps moved around towards my brother's room. Rustling can be heard loudly through the house and things being thrown. I knew they were in my brother's room. Some of his friends are into seedy situations, and I knew it could be one of them. I heard the footsteps coming back to my door, and the doorknob handle moves. I immediately turned my back towards the door and closed my eyes tight, a hand over my mouth to stop me from screaming. The door opens, but that's it. He just leaves, and a car drives down the road. I finally bucked up enough courage to get out of bed. Everything in the house, except for my brother's room, was undisturbed. Immediately, I called my brother and asked him if any of his friends were coming over. He said not that he knew of, and I told him what happened. He got off the phone with me and started calling around. I went back to bed and noticed I still had my window cracked from earlier, and I realized I had my sheet off of me and only wearing a t-shirt to bed. If this was who I think it was, this wasn't a random event. One of my brother's friends has always had eyes for me, and the fact that he saw me sleeping in just a t-shirt makes me freaked out. Whether or not he took something from my brother's room or knew I was home sleeping before having to go to work that night, I don't know. Sometimes country life isn't so safe after all. Update. Sorry y'all for the late update. It's been a crazy week, but thank you for being with me. My brother got back with me with the news I absolutely dreaded hearing. None of his friends said or claimed to have been in the house at the time of the incident, so now I'm even more afraid of who it was in the house and what their intentions were. They could have just been scoping out the house during the day. I just hope I don't have another visit like this anytime soon, but if there is the next time, I'll be sure to be ready for them. When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. I lived in a small village. This meant I mostly spent the days on my own while my parents worked. I watched TV and played The Sims. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, where I like to sit in my living room meant my chair was right next to the window, so I could see the people on the street and they could see me too, I guess. One day I was sitting watching daytime TV when I noticed a man walking down our street. Our street is a dead end, and I normally recognize everyone who walks down it, but I had certainly never seen him before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper with the hood up and sleeves rolled up, revealing tattoos on his arm. He was carrying a large duffel bag and looking closely at each house as he passed. As I was sat there watching him, I was clearly in full view of him too. He started to pass our house when I saw him see me. He smiled and turned to come up our short driveway. He came to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer the door to someone I didn't know, but he had already seen me. And at 14, I was afraid of being rude to an adult, so I obediently went and opened the door a crack. I peeked around the door and said, "Hello?" As he spoke, he pulled out his duffel bag from around the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I thought he would probably leave if I said no, but instead he stepped towards the door and unzipped the bag. Well, the thing is, I just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know? It's hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things. He started pulling out towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk from the bag. The word prison made my heart skip, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money and closed the door. He stood on the step for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help, so I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he did. I soon settled back down to watching TV and forgot all about the encounter. At about 5 p.m., my parents came home and took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later, there was a knock at the door. I came to the landing and peered down as my mom answered. 2 police officers stood on the step. They asked if anyone had called at our house that day. My mom said no one had, and that's when I remembered the visitor from earlier. I came downstairs and said, actually someone had came. Seeing that I was young, the 2 police officers asked if they could come in and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man I had a conversation with. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to just be honest about everything that happened. Once I told them what had happened, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then thanked me and left. After they left, I asked my parents what was going on. My mom explained that a few minutes after the man had left our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs. When he found her in the shower, he sexually assaulted her. With my description and evidence for the girl, they were able to track the guy down. It turns out that he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I'm never answering that door when I'm alone now, and I also won't shower when I'm home alone. I live in an apartment on the second floor of a duplex in a small city. The tenants in the unit below have 2 dogs that will bark at pretty much anything and everything. The other night, about a quarter after midnight, I was laying in bed listening to relaxing music to help me go to sleep when the dogs start barking. My neighbors weren't home at the time and no one was trying to stop them. Through their barking, I could hear voices under my window. I peeked through the curtains just in time to see 2 males walking across the yard to the sidewalk and up the street away from my place. As they were walking away, I heard one of them say, "You gotta be quiet. What if he comes out with a gun?" The dog stopped barking after the individuals left the area. The city I'm in has always been seen as safer and having lower crime rate than others, but lately it seems to be getting worse. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of an anthill, but it put me on edge. A few years ago, around 11 p.m. on a chilly Thursday in late September, I just finished my Chinese takeout and was relaxing on the sofa watching TV. For some background, I live alone in the second story of a 3-family home in a busy New England college town. My landlord was still trying to find tenants for the other 2 units, so I was the only person living in the building at the time. The building had 2 stairwells, one main stairwell that led up to all 3 floors, and a side stairwell that only went up to the 2nd floor, directly to my apartment. I was about to turn in for the night when I heard footsteps in the main stairwell. This immediately worried me because I always kept the doors accessible to the street locked. Someone had to have broken in. I start to panic as I hear the footsteps moving closer to my front door. I grab my cell phone and run to the side stairwell and dial 911. I give the dispatcher my address and beg them to hurry. I stay on the line with the dispatcher, waiting for the police to get there for what felt like forever, still hiding in the stairwell and praying that whoever was in the house wouldn't find me. As soon as the police arrived, I burst out of the house, crying hysterically. I waited in one of the police cars as they searched the entire house. They found no one. Nothing was stolen, but they discovered that the intruder had entered through a broken window on the 1st floor. It took me almost a month before I felt safe staying alone in my apartment again. This happened 4 years back. I was 14 years old and my parents were out and left me and my little sister, 10 at the time, home alone. It was about 10 or 11 when the lights go out. This used to happen sometimes in my country, since it was a new country and really poor. But this time I noticed something out of the ordinary. Only the lights to our house were out and my neighbor's lights were on. I had a bad feeling, so I quickly locked the doors and closed the blinds. I told my little sister to hide behind the couch and not to go out no matter what happened. I hid somewhere else with a knife, trying to call my mom, but she didn't pick up. I thought it was over, so I get out of my hiding place and head to the kitchen so I could look out the window. Before I get close, I hear the doorknob turning. It doesn't work, so the person on the other side tries it again, now violently. That's when I panicked and shouted, "Who the fuck are you? Fuck off my house. I have called the police." I hear footsteps and then nothing. I went into the other room to look out the window and I saw someone running out of my backyard. My sister was crying, so I comforted her while we still stayed hidden until my parents came home an hour later. We told them everything and my dad said whoever it was had intentionally cut the house's electricity to scare us. To this day, every time the electricity goes out, I get kind of scared and I'm glad that we were okay. I just recently moved into a decently sized 2-bedroom house with a full basement, where a lot of my family's not so important belongings are still stored in boxes to be sorted through. Our house resides in a quiet neighborhood, but our elderly neighbors have advised us that some sketchy figures wander about at night, as there's a section of neighborhood 2 or so blocks away that houses people who have nowhere to go. Fast forward to maybe 2 weeks ago, I had gone down to the basement to sift through some of the items and noticed a few random things on the table. Toolkit, binders, family pictures, etc. They had been opened and strewn about carelessly. Thinking another family member was sorting as well, I picked them up and went about my task. Over the following week, I would hear strange banging coming from the basement, sort of like our washing machine lid was being shut. Now, I'll admit that I'm skittish and my mind sometimes jumps to the worst possible outcome, so I became worried. At the time, I was the only person home, so I grabbed my pepper spray and went to go check. Stupidly, I might add. Our basement has 2 full rooms plus 2 adjoining smaller rooms, one of which has a door that I myself had never opened. It was also barred by a beam of some sort, but the door stands slightly ajar. I assume it was just a small storage area. Upon turning on the lights, I cautiously looked around. I'd seen that a few more of our belongings and boxes that weren't unpacked yet had been opened and laid on the floor. What concerned me the most was our basement door that leads to the outside was unlocked. That's not something my family would forget about. Further inspection of the basement proved that no one was inside, though I didn't try to pry open the barred door. Telling my father about this, he said that the noises were probably the heater popping and that perhaps he forgot to lock the side door after taking out the trash. I'm not so convinced of the story, but I really hope I'm not correct in thinking that someone had found their way into our home and has been scavenging through our basement. As of writing this, nothing has happened, but hearing people walk down the street shouting on some nights has me uneasy. I make sure that the doors are locked every night now, and on a free day, I'll have my dad open that barred basement door to put my mind at rest. We'll check back if I find anything out of the ordinary. This happened 16 years ago when I was living in a not-so-great neighborhood in a not-so-great 1920s style house. The house, despite being pretty run down, had a really neat design. It had a huge front porch that was screened in and large picture windows on all sides. The front of the house faced the main road through a pretty rough neighborhood, which meant some interesting scenes went down right outside our front door, such as high-speed police chases. During that year or so that we lived on that street, there was a homeless man that would walk down a sidewalk in front of our house. He was over 6 feet tall with a full head of dreadlocks and wore a large trench coat, even though it was Florida. He would slowly pass in front of our house every few days, dragging a large plastic outdoor trash can, usually muttering to himself. He never really bothered me or made me uneasy, as I have a soft spot in my heart for homeless, especially those who seem mentally ill. I was off work one day, home alone, waiting for my boyfriend to get home. It was still in the early evening and daylight outside, so I had the blinds up and some of the windows open. I was at the computer in the living room when I heard the man outside dragging the trash can, talking to himself. By this time, we were familiar with the sounds of the man that I didn't even go to the window to look. It goes away from my mind and an hour passes when I randomly noticed that I never heard him pass our house. As I mentioned, I have become very familiar with the sound of him walking past our house, so when I realized that I hadn't heard him go from one side to the other, I got goosebumps over my entire body. Because of my severe anxiety, I'm basically frozen in my chair at this point. I know that the front blinds are always closed because we usually have a bong on our table, so I can't tell if anyone's in my front yard without getting out of my seat. I slowly stand up and approach the door. I look through the peephole, and in my horror, the man is staring right back at me. He had been standing there staring for an hour. I know this because as soon as he noticed my shadow obscure the peephole, he starts pounding on the door, pulling on the handle, and screaming nonsense at me. I completely panic. I had no idea what this man was capable of, but as a survivor of sexual assault, I tend to immediately fear the worst. As he continued to pound on the door and yell, I ran to my bedroom to get our gun. I go back into the living room, gun loaded and pointing at the door. I screamed for him to go away. He continued without any pause, as if he didn't hear me. I repeat myself and added that I had a gun. Literally no change. Finally, I screamed that I had a gun loaded. I was terrified, and I would shoot him through the door if he didn't leave. After that, silence. I was too scared to check the peephole after our face-to-face encounter, so I called 911 and begged them to hurry. They caught up with a guy at the end of the road and drove me down to identify him. The cops were complete jerks to me. Apparently, they knew this guy, as he was a regular trespasser at a local business. I explained the story in detail to the police officers. I was visibly shaken and crying. I explained that I almost shot this man and probably would have killed him. They tell me that he's harmless and that I'm overreacting. Maybe I was overreacting, but I'm not sorry. Would I have been absolutely heartbroken if I would have hurt this man, who obviously is not in the right mind? 100%. Would I have regretted not acting this way if he had gotten through my door? Most likely. Either way, let's not meet again, trash can guy. So I've never posted on the sub, though I have other stories I've buried deep until recently. But this is happening in the present. I have had people stalk and follow me before, and because of that and my true crime addiction, I've become supremely paranoid and a solid curtain twitcher. I'm a 31-year-old female. I reside in an upstairs room that was my first room to myself as a child. I had to leave a bad situation and therefore ended up back in my childhood home. For reference, when our house was built, we were told that the field to our left, with horses and a barn at the time, would one day soon be a development. It was 2000 when we were told that, and it wasn't until 2022 that the road started being formed and the foundations laid. I already had someone follow me home before when I was young, but I was in a different bedroom next door. My parents put in a free library that's right below my window, and nighttime security lights that were very bright and turn on if you're within 20 feet on the side of the house that my room is on. I'll admit, having an open field next to me for so long made me accustomed to not closing the curtains when I change, because there was never anyone to watch. Now there is. For the past 2 weeks, the motion sensor lights next to the free library have been going off late at night. Because my one side of the curtain is still open, so I can use my vape. That's the only reason I noticed it at all. I didn't think too much of it at first. We lock all our doors and windows every night, and I'm on the second floor. I also always look out the window to see if it was a car, someone walking their dog, or a deer, only to see nothing. To add, they put a shitload of streetlights around this area, so the visibility is great. But it just kept happening. So last night I did my usual, and I saw the lights come on out of my peripherals. I acted natural, giving full view out of the window that I was going to bed. It was 3 a.m. Turned the TV off, closed the windows and curtains, turning the lights out. Then I ducked down, peering through the curtains to the sidewalk below. I honestly thought I was going to pass out when after a few minutes, maybe 5, someone comes out from the side of my house, all silhouette, dressed in black. They kept their back to me until the light turned off, but I swear I could still see them standing there, looking up like they could see me. I called the police, but while I was on the phone with the operator, I saw him run off. There wasn't much the police could do, except say that they'll have a car drive around and look. My parents are asleep and I know I have to tell them tomorrow. This scares the crap out of me. If it hadn't been happening for weeks and was just a solo incident, I probably would be fine about it. But the fact that the lights have been going off without me seeing activity and what happened tonight makes me think that this person has been watching me and watching my house. To the person outside my window, let's please never fucking meet. Small update. I did tell my parents, and at first they brushed me off, claiming I had a couple of drinks and it was late, so I probably just saw someone checking out the library. I then had another conversation about it with my dad, who said that there had been reports the last couple weeks of car break-ins, and since my car was parked on the side of the street right outside my window, maybe they were trying to break into it. I pointed out that if they were trying to get into my car, why was he pressed up against the house where he wasn't visible from my window? And why did he at no point go towards my car? I think I freaked him out enough that we were gonna potentially get a camera for that area. Given all of the development happening around us, I think it's smart even without this incident. Thank you all for your advice and replies. I'll update here if anything else happens. In June of this year, I moved out of my parents' apartment as I finally got a steady job and longed for some sort of freedom. I looked for apartments that were affordable in my city and found one that's a 2 or 3 minute walk from my parents' apartment. To me, it was perfect. I get to live alone and my parents would still be nearby, so I could visit them whenever I wanted or pop in to have breakfast with them. The apartment itself is great. It's not really much to look at, but for a single male, it's more than enough. My apartment has a long corridor connecting each room together from the sides, with the front door being at the start of the corridor. My bedroom is the second room on the left, but since the walls are pretty thin, you could literally hear people outside the apartment complex walking and talking from my bedroom, or any room for that matter. Last week I came home from the pub after meeting up with a few friends. It wasn't really late, around 10:15, 10:30ish, and I had the day off, so I took a shower and hopped into bed to watch Netflix. It was probably around midnight when I heard a faint knock coming from the front door. I stopped the show that I was watching and listened for a minute or so, and just thought that it was my mind playing tricks on me. I continued watching Netflix when once again I heard a 2-motion knock on my door. I sat up from bed and went to the door, looked through the peephole, and sure enough, it was pitch black. Once again, I shrugged it off and went back to my room, but before I could even sit down properly, I heard a slightly louder set of knocks. At this point, I thought my friends were playing a prank on me, so I called my friend and asked him if he was knocking on my door. And if he was, it wasn't amusing. He paused for a second and said, "Dude, I'm home. I have to be up at like 7:30. I believed him and hung up the phone. I was talking pretty loudly, so whoever was knocking probably heard me, and as soon as I hung up, I heard another knock. At this point, I was pretty pissed off, so I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. I then unlocked the door to take a peek, and closed the door and locked it. Me being angry and a bit intoxicated, I decided to wait to catch whoever was knocking. So I spent a solid 10 minutes slightly looking through the peephole before being a bit startled as someone put their hand over the peephole and knocked again. I immediately started unlocking the door and ran out into the apartment hall. I heard someone booking it down the steps and heard him lean against the wall as his jacket shrugged the wall. So I ran a few steps down before realizing whoever it was waiting behind the corner to get the jump on me. I hurried back inside and called the cops. They were there within a few minutes and scanned the building and the street but couldn't find anyone. They told me it could have just been a kid playing a prank and to never run after someone. They kept a patrol car around the entire night, and the knocking stopped. It could have just been some kids being dumb, but the part that gave me the creeps was the fact that whoever it was ran down the stairs and stopped behind the corner. He didn't keep running. If it was some pranksters, I'd find it more likely that they would have just booked it outside. As I said, it's been a week and the knocking stopped. It kept me on edge for a few nights, because I expected to be jumped by someone when walking to my apartment, but nothing so far has come of it. I've let it go and just hope it won't happen again. So this happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12. Little backstory here. We lived in a small town for several years and it was safe. A few years into living there, we had a cop with his wife and 2 kids move into a house 2 doors down from us. Our house was built sometime in the 1920s. A few nights before this incident, our other sibling locked us out of the back door. Us being idiots, we kicked the back door in. The door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall, and the door was just hanging. One of our blinds were broken. We didn't have the money to fix it, seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was tight growing up. Anyway, the blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage and our driveway. Next to the driveway was our neighbor's property, which was abandoned and had tall shrubs. What we didn't know was 2 people had been hiding in the shrubs watching us. My little sister's name is Candace. It was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were a mile from our house fishing at about 10 p.m. at night. All of our siblings and parents were asleep. I was sitting on the couch watching TV. Candace was sitting on the bed watching TV with me too. All of a sudden, Candace and I heard a very loud crash noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up, ran to the phone, and called my brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend twisted her ankle. He gets home. By this point, we woke up everyone in the house and had all the lights on. My brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6'4", 300 pounds. Unknown to my family, I had slipped outside to check with my brother. I know it was stupid for me to do, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet. He ran back to our fenced-in backyard. He gets within arm's reach of this guy and steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother and takes off running and hops the fence to get away sadly. I didn't see this because I went back into the house after a while. My brother comes in. He tells everyone that he saw a guy in all black and he's about 6 foot. That is all he saw. The rest of the night was calm. My brother on high alert. The next night my brother was out with his girlfriend. It was again 10 at night. Candace and I were watching TV again in the same spot as last time. Again we heard a loud crash coming from our back door. We screamed and called our brother's cell phone. He came home again. The whole house was awake again with all the lights on. My brother goes out and checks it out. This time we didn't see anyone out there. Forgot to mention both of these times we looked out the back door. Both times the back door looked like it had been kicked really hard. This time around the frame was out of the wall more. The door was leading further into the house. We didn't make a police report because we had a cop that lived 2 houses down from us. While he was at work, us kids would take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids. We didn't really see him much, and when we did, he was so sweet and nice. But anyways, we told a police officer about what happened. He told us that he thinks it was 2 guys, that they had been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks. He said, I believe that there's 2 guys. One was a lookout and hides right here in the shrubs. He keeps lookout while the other one does the possible breaking in. He said that they had to have been looking through the blinds since they were broken. At night you could look in and you couldn't see anything if you looked out. After those 2 nights there were no more attempted break-ins. Fast forward to fall of that year. Our cop neighbor told us this. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but we caught a peeping Tom. He's in jail now, about 20 or so miles away. He said that after the peeping Tom got caught, it all stopped. That the town was safe again because it was. Candace and I were so freaked out and scared. To this day, her and I have to check all the doors and windows to ensure that they're locked. We check multiple times a day. If any of our curtains are open, we get scared. We close the curtains every time. I'm honestly afraid that it will happen again. We no longer live in that town, but that thought is still there. To this day, we don't know what their intentions were. I think if he would have gotten in, we wouldn't be here today. This is all scary. Years ago, when I was pregnant, we were just getting ready for bed, and it was late, about 1:30 a.m. This woman knocked on the door, and my husband answered. She was clearly high and jittery and looking all around everywhere. She asked if she could use the toilet. My husband said no, this is not a public restroom. We both got a really bad vibe off her. She is quite a big woman, and clearly something wasn't right with her. She started to try to open our security door, rattling the handle, but we have always been very cautious about keeping it locked the minute we walk in. My husband told her no, to go away, and shut the door. She started to bang on the door, screaming that she needed to use the toilet. My husband opened the door and told her to piss off or he was calling the cops. She stopped, froze, and for about 20 seconds stood there, staring at us. And then she turned around and walked away. We turned off all the lights and looked through the blinds and saw her next door talking to two people. I said to my husband that was a setup for a home invasion, and he agreed. The thing is, I've actually seen this woman around a few times, so she could have known that I was heavily pregnant, and that would make us good targets because we would have been compliant. People have a tendency to be more compliant when they're trying to protect their family. I reckon that she followed me home. I never saw her again. I'm not sure if I'm overreacting a little, but this was very creepy. This morning at about 3 a.m., my roommate and I, both young women, watched a man park at the end of our driveway and come up to our door. He was shining a flashlight around, looking up and down and all around the door. He walked over to the neighboring house and got back in his car and drove away. We were absolutely terrified, and I'm trying to find any reasonable explanation other than potential robbery or something worse. I believe he saw our security cameras and that's why he left, but I'm scared that he was scoping it out and is going to come back. Just a strange encounter at a strange hour. This happened around 2021 in India, around COVID period where lockdowns were still very effective. My dad used to live in another city. My brother was in college, and my mom had got a government job, so she had to go to her office every day. So I was basically left alone from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. We used to live in an apartment unit, but it had two doors. One was the main door, and the other one was located in the biggest room, basically my parents' room. The door was clearly locked with an actual lock from the outside, and it also had a metal sliding door. We had a Ring doorbell on the outside, but it was just connected to a small bulb in the bedroom. So one day around 12 p.m., I was in my room, which was basically adjacent to my parents' room. I felt weird, I don't know. So I went to go check their room. I went to the room and saw the bulb blinking, meaning someone was ringing the doorbell. My mom said to ignore it, because if it was someone we knew, they would know the real door. I stood there for a moment when the person started knocking really hard on the door, like it was straight up rattling. But the thing was, due to the metal gate in the front, it would be very hard to put your hand inside to knock on the actual door. I was a teen back then, and even I couldn't put half a palm, and this man was straight up banging on it. I got scared and called my mom, who told me not to panic. But I was really weirded out, so I locked my bedroom door with the lock they had, and went downstairs to chill in my brother's room. It was one of those days where my mom straight up wouldn't return until 8 p.m., so I was alone for a long time, and I was scared to even go upstairs. Around 6 p.m., our helper Annie came, and I was a little better, seeing that someone else was in the house. During that time, I used to have a private tutor, and my teacher would come around 7:30, so I felt better knowing that people would be in the house. Our main door had a big window just beside it, so whenever someone was at the door, we used to open the blinds to check who it was before opening it. But Auntie had the habit of opening it without checking. Fortunately, that day, when the doorbell rang, she opened the blinds, and then she came to my brother's room to tell me that we had a cake delivery. Thing was, we didn't, obviously. So when I went to check through the window, there was a man with a cap hiding his face, holding a very small box. Now, a cake box is very square and big, right? Even a pound cake has a big-ass box. And in India, we have very small sweet boxes, so imagine a 100-gram sweet box being called a cake box. I asked him who the delivery was for. He didn't give me a name, not even the company. He just told us it was for our flat. I called my mom and asked if she had ordered it, and she didn't know what I was talking about. So the dude was just like, accept the box, open the door. And by a miracle, my teacher walked up the stairs and asked what was going on. The dude saw my teacher and ran away, and we let our teacher enter. Later, when my mom inquired about a delivery coming to our flat with our security guard, he said he wasn't there at his post for about a half hour, the same time period that this happened, and we didn't have any CCTV in our building, so no one saw him. It wasn't that scary maybe, but it did shake me up, and I asked my mom to at least come quickly from her office on the next day, and I didn't stay upstairs when I was home alone. This happened 7 or 8 years ago. My girlfriend and I live 2 hours apart, and whenever I can, I try to stay at her place on the weekends. She rents a 2-story apartment. One particular Sunday, though, when she went out to do an errand, I suddenly got the urge to go up to her second-floor balcony after making coffee. I got spooked by a man in a tree outside my girl's apartment. Mind you that this tree is kinda high that if you jump hard enough, you can get to the second-floor balcony, no problem. The look in his face said that he wasn't expecting someone to be home. Maybe he was monitoring the house and tried to break in when he saw my girl leave. Anyway, I stared at him for a good minute while he was trying to play it cool and sell that he was just randomly climbing a tree on a random day. I reported that shit to the cops as soon as he got off the tree. They caught him a few hours later with stolen valuables from nearby houses. This happened quite a few years ago, back when my family lived right behind Albertsons, when it was still open in Napa, California. I was in middle school at the time, 23 years old now. It was late at night, and I was fast asleep as it was a school night. I heard screaming and woke up and immediately rushed out of the room. My sister was closing her sliding glass door that had a broken handle inside. It was really difficult to open and close because of the rust, also pretty noisy. My sister had been sleeping in the recliner in the family room that night. She was in a major panic, closing the sliding door that led to the backyard when I rushed to that room. She had just told me that a man broke in. As luck would have it, we accidentally left that door unlocked that night. We both went up to my parents and explained what happened. They called the police, which ended up showing up 10 to 15 minutes later. That's when my sister explained to them what had occurred. When the man was opening the sliding glass door, she was woken up. She was groggy at the time and figured it was my dad just letting out our cat. The recliner faced away from the glass sliding door, facing the TV. But as she was becoming more awake and aware, she realized it wasn't my dad, but a man in a black outfit with a black ski mask on. She started to scream as he groped around her body, his hands moving up and down her body. That's when I came in. As soon as he heard the beads that hung from my bedroom door, he immediately ran out the open sliding glass door. It had scared my family greatly, especially my sister. She has been traumatized since then. Over the coming weeks, we eventually found out that there had been a series of break-ins around our neighborhood. All reports of women finding men in their room going through their underwear drawers, and one report where a man was saying very lewd things to a woman that had woken up to find him in her room. Ever since then, we have been mindful of locking all the doors and to check them and make sure that they're all locked. I live in a relatively walkable area of a city, and recently this guy's been coming to our house and leaving things in the porch basket we use to receive packages. We caught him on the Ring camera twice, and have since bought the Ring paid plan so we could watch the videos back. The first time we left a pouch of weed and papers. The weed was sealed, and the papers were not. We thought it was a promotion for the Dab Lounge across the street, but probably not. Mind you, weed is not legal in my state, but there are obvious loopholes. The second time, he returned within 30 minutes of the first and left a handful of Pokemon cards and a page torn out of an old journal filled with nonsense ramblings. He came back for a third time today, 5 days after the first and second, and left a bowl, like for weed, and the packaging for a dog muzzle. We were unable to watch the video back this time, but he came up to the porch smiling, put the bowl in the basket, then sat down to read the newspaper flyer someone had left on our doorstep. He then added the muzzle packaging and left. I'm not sure if this sub is supposed to be for advice or not, but what the hell do you do in this situation? I don't know if calling the police would help anything since he hasn't exactly done anything. Hello, my name is Alex, and here's my story. At the time, I was in my old bedroom, which was basically one of the smallest rooms in the house. I am now in a new bedroom. This one is way more spacious. My bedroom was about 5 meters by 5 meters. It could only fit a bed, 2 nightstands, and a dresser with mirror screwed on top. It was in the basement. Now most of you guys probably think that the basement is dark, creepy, and eerie, but mine was not. My parents had made sure it was full of life as possible. They painted the walls, installed a gaming room, which I used often, basically making it really cool if someone in our family wanted to have a party there. Now the room I think it was actually fair I had that one room, because before we moved houses, both my brothers had to sleep in a tiny bedroom, about 5 square feet large. Basically the worst, and I had the biggest room in the whole house. So at the time, we had 3 cats. One of the 3 was my favorite. I loved her and took care of her, and she made sure I wasn't depressed. Sometimes we would just let her go outside during the night, and I would let her go in sometimes when she scratched on my window. She still does this to this day. I was an insomniac, and I never slept well. My parents knew about it, so they decided to give me some melatonin pills to help me sleep. My window was on the top of my bedroom wall, which meant my cat didn't need to hop on any type of ledge to scratch her paws on it from the outside, letting me know that she wanted to get in. It was a night that I decided to take some melatonin pills, which worked fantastically when I couldn't sleep. So I was literally about to sleep, like I was on the edge of dreaming, and I heard my cat scratch. Or so I thought. I sighed, got up to move the curtains out of the way so I could let her in. But when I opened the window, I heard something move or step on the rocks around my window. At the time, I was too sleepy to realize it wasn't my cat's footsteps that I heard, but a human's. So, as a normal person, I yelled my cat's name, put my hand out the window to tap on the ground, as such to let my cat know that she could come to get in. That was my mistake. In no time, I heard footsteps coming straight to the window, and I felt a man's hand grab my arm and start to pull me out the window. I started screaming for someone to come and help, but no one came. I felt the adrenaline instantly rush to my body and quickly grabbed a sharp object. I believe it was a dirty knife covered in old food. I stabbed the guy's hand. Blood dripped out as I heard a blood-curdling scream, the scream that I will remember for my whole life. The man quickly ran away as fast as he could, and I fell back on my bed. I opened my door and ran as fast as I could to my parents' bedroom to tell them the horror story I just lived. They woke up fast and called the cops, reassuring me that I was safe and everything, caring for my horrible wound from the man's grip on my arm. The cops arrived at my house and I told them what happened. I was still laced with adrenaline. My words were not sounding clear. With the man's blood that was left on the knife, they managed to get his name and where he lived. They followed up with us and told us that he got arrested for attempted kidnapping and that he's already been charged with many other crimes before. I am still traumatized to this day. I was 15 years old. My family had just moved to a city. My parents found a house to live in, which was very nice. My parents slept on the first floor where the kitchen and living room were also located. My brother and I slept on the ground floor in the rooms next door. An important detail, our rooms opened to the game room with 3 small windows. One evening in the first week after we moved, I was so tired that I fell asleep very early while scrolling through TikTok. I woke up a few hours later, around 2 a.m., with the feeling of being observed by something. I stood in complete darkness for a dozen minutes, then grabbed the remote control and closed the shutters on my windows. After this, I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't because the feeling of being watched didn't leave me, so I kept busy as best I could. I played the electric guitar as it was almost inaudible when not plugged in. I did some drawings and I read. 4 a.m. arrives. I haven't slept for 2 hours and I still don't fall asleep, so I decide to stay on my phone until I fall asleep. I put on my headphones and turn on the music. Suddenly, I hear tapping on the window in the game room, which is just behind my bedroom door. I turn off my music right away, take off my headphones, and stay quiet. The tapping becomes more aggressive. Then the person says, "Hey, hey," and no more noise. Panicked, I call my mother, hoping that she will wake up and answer the phone. She answers me. I tell her everything. We exit the house to look around, but no one was there. Some small plants under the window were damaged and were laying on the ground, so there really was someone. Today, we still don't know who it was, nor what he or she wanted. I'm a 25-year-old non-binary person renting a 4-bedroom house. One of my roommates is my boyfriend, and the other is my best friend of 10 years. We'll call her Tracy. We have been looking for a new roommate, and because of the way this situation turned out, we have determined that I'm no longer in charge of looking for roommates because I'm not judgmental enough and am known to ignore red flags. I will start at the beginning, which is the house showing. So, our new prospective roommate showed up to the house showing and introduced himself. He definitely seemed strange at first, but I wrote it off as him just being eccentric. The main red flag was that at some point he randomly said something to the effect of, "And I will not bring meth into your house because I'm not on meth. I hate them and I see them as a scourge on this entire country." I didn't ask, so I was immediately weirded out, but my boyfriend and the roommate who was moving out also met the guy, and they both thought that apart from that, he seemed normal. He didn't look like a stereotypical meth head. His skin was clear and he was kind of chubby. We thought that maybe he thought I was a meth head because I'm a little bit scary. I have green hair, a 1-gauge septum, and 6 facial piercings. In addition, my roommate who was moving out turned out to be hiding a cat, which made the whole house smell like cat piss, which I've been told is what meth smells like. Also, the town that this guy is coming from is known for meth and crack, and he seemed to be explicitly trying to stay away from that town. So I thought maybe he was afraid of ending up in a situation where he was living with drug addicts and was trying to suss us out that way. Giving him the benefit of the doubt was my first mistake. Tracy and I were both wigged out about the entire thing, but we were kind of desperate for a roommate, and all the other people responding to the listing were not great fits, or were even sketchier than this guy, so we let him move in. Skip to the move-in date. He brings the old man to help him move his stuff. He then proceeds to make the old man move all the things by himself up the stairs while he sits there, including a refrigerator, by himself. New guy signs the lease. Immediately after signing the lease, he informs us that he did not include himself using a real name and proceeds to tell us his real name. This man was not transgender, so the only reason I could think of why he initially gave us a fake name is probably so he could avoid us running a background check. After this, I had to go to work. Throughout my shift, Tracy sends me a message that this guy is weird, but her responses are vague. I didn't find out what happened until I got home. Here's what she told me. New guy goes to the bar after signing the lease and comes back after being kicked out before 9 p.m. The bar he went to is a biker bar that is notorious for being rowdy. It's hard to get kicked out of there. You pretty much have to do something heinous, or you have to be creeping on a woman in order to get kicked out. When he comes back, he's drunk off his ass and says, The men must have been intimidated by me. It sounds to me like he was creeping. Before this, I had told the new guy that our landlord is coming the next day to fix some things in the house. When the new guy came home, Tracy reminded him that the landlord was coming the next day. He became extremely angry to the point where he's flailing his arms around, and she thought that he was going to start breaking things. Tracy was so uncomfortable that she almost went to wake up my boyfriend in the other room. Eventually, the new guy calmed down. However, there is a beanbag chair next to the couch, and Tracy is sitting on the beanbag with her legs slung over the armrest of the couch. At first, the new guy sat on the couch. He begins to read off poetry that he wrote to her for an entire hour and a half, all of which is literally just streams of consciousness about how he wants all junkies to die. Afterwards, he started telling her how beautiful she was over and over again, and literally lays his head down between her legs. She's trying to ignore him, and he won't stop asking her if she fell asleep. Every time she moves, he gets closer. Then, he starts inviting her to his room for a beer. Eventually, she gets up and goes into her room at 11 p.m. This man harassed her for 2 entire hours. I thought that was everything, but then she tells me that she sent the guy's picture to her mom, who sent the picture to everyone she knows from the town that he previously was living in. It turned out that he had been stalking Tracy's aunt for an entire year, and that he's banned from the bar she works at because he's threatened to kidnap her. She literally has to be escorted out, not only by workers but customers, to her car sometimes. So we tell our landlord. Luckily, our lease hadn't been finalized yet, so he agreed to kick him out. I call my mom to come over, and Tracy calls her brother for backup just in case things go south. Our landlord shows up and essentially tells him that he needs to leave and doesn't even let the new guy get a word in. The new guy starts getting agitated and aggressive, so we call the cops and several officers show up. Told the guy that he had no legal standing as there was no lease. He introduced himself to us with a fake name, and he hadn't even been there for 24 hours, and that he had to get out. The guy had to beg his sister to come pick him up, and she was so unwilling to do that she didn't agree until he offered to pay her $200. It's a 20-minute ride to where he was going. He left most of his stuff on our porch. When we went into his room, it smelled like cigarettes, and there was an empty pack on the floor, including not 1 or 2, but 7 empty Dr. Pepper cans, and garbage everywhere, even crusty socks. The entire situation had me so stressed out that I didn't even notice that he had left a pair of pissy shorts in the middle of the house main hallway, and that's the first thing you see when you walk into the house. They were there for an entire day when he knew the landlord was coming. They were sitting there when he left. I picked them up with a glove and put them on the porch for him to retrieve, but who knows if and when he did retrieve those things, because he came back earlier, touched his things like he was going to take them, and then just immediately left. All I have to say is that I'm really relieved that we caught on to this before the lease was finalized, because it easily could have turned into a situation where me and Tracy were being sexually assaulted, or worse. Thanks for listening to my story. For context, I live with my girlfriend. In the last month, her and I are the only people that I know of that have been in my car. We live in an apartment complex right off the highway. Apartment won't add more parking despite not having enough, so sometimes we have to park right off the highway with no one around. I've been worried that might make it a higher risk for my car getting broken into, but we live in a decent area, so I don't think about it that much. Anyway, Saturday night, me and my lady get back from hanging out with some friends. I had brought my backpack over, so I went to the back seat to get it and noticed a red Craftsman power drill sitting under my seat. I grabbed it assuming my girlfriend had put it there, but she didn't recognize it. My dad and bro had come over for a project a few weeks ago, so I thought that they maybe placed it there. But after reaching out, they as well have never seen this drill before. I'll keep this last part short, but because of what I've already mentioned, I'm always checking my phone to make sure I remember to lock my car. I can see if it's locked on the app. The Wednesday or Thursday before, however, I'd woken up and noticed I left my car unlocked all night. Didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Am I reaching here? What else could it be? Why would someone put a drill in my car and leave? Forgot to add, drill seemed like it was full battery when I found it. Hello. I've wrote once before on Let's Not Meet, and today I was reading some submissions and it made me remember this event. At the time of the story, I was 14. As well as being younger, I had developed crippling anxiety and depression. With that being said, I was, and still am very vigilant about my surroundings. On this day, I had planned to stay the night at my friend's house. I had never stayed at her place before. We always stayed at mine. For you to understand the story, I need to explain the layout of this house. It was located on a sloped hill, and when you drove down the steep road, the first part of the house you would see was big and expansive. It looked like an old mansion. If you continued driving down, you'd be met with two semi-separated buildings. Both were small and run down. When I say small, I mean one of them was just a bedroom, and the other one was a bedroom with a small bathroom and kitchen. No door inside, just a piece of cloth to separate the bathroom entrance from the kitchen. My friend's room was the bedroom, and her mom lived in the other section with a bathroom kitchen. The landlord lived on the property in the main house, the big mansion. It was located in the middle of the woods, and when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. I mean all you could see was the expansive Australian forest. Australian rainforests are incredibly dense, and if you try to walk through it, you would most likely receive some sort of bite, whether it be a spider, ant, or leech. I'll cut to the first thing that happened. My friend and I had walked into her mom's flat. I forget why. I think we were either hungry or asking how to get reception. There was none. We called out for her mom. She was in the bathroom, and as we walked past the small window, I heard, "Yeah?" come from outside. I turned to my friend, and she looked at me the same way I was. We were confused. If her mom was in the bathroom that was right in front of us, why did we hear a male voice coming from right outside? We brushed this off as not trying to scare ourselves and continued having fun in my friend's room. For a little more context, the landlord used half of her room as storage and blocked off the section of the room with a tall shelf and divider. There is a huge glass sliding door in the front of her room, and in the block back section, there's another door. You couldn't get through that door unless you squeezed through a section outside. Now skipping forward a little to nighttime. My friend and I had just gone to the bathroom, so we had to slink out of her room and walk to her mom's flat. Her mom was fast asleep. We used the bathroom as quietly as possible and then exited. As we were making the small walk back to my friend's room, we saw something out in the woods. A pair of eyes. They were looking directly at us from behind a tree. We panicked and froze. I pulled out my phone to take a photo before we sprinted back into her room, locking the glass door behind us and drawing the curtains. It's not a reach to say that we were freaking out. We looked at the photo, and sure enough, when I brightened the image, there was what looked to be a man staring at us from the dark woods. We were extremely scared, but I called my mom, who was about an hour away, and she dismissed us. After a while, we relaxed and chalked it up to our imaginations playing tricks on us, and I pulled out my laptop to put on a movie. I forget which movie, but it was a cheesy rom-com. Maybe 20 to 30 minutes into the movie, we froze and paused it. Footsteps. There were footsteps crunching on dry leaves right outside our room. We listened in horror as the footsteps moved through the tight alley that led to the back door. We both moved slowly, standing on the bed and looking over the room divider. Our eyes were locked on the back door, and after a moment of complete silence, it turned. The doorknob wiggled slowly before it became faster. The door couldn't be opened as it was jammed against an object that was in the storage. Then it stopped. No more noise. We were crying, holding each other in our arms, trying to be as quiet as possible. Then the footsteps slowly crunched on the leaves in the opposite direction, back to the front of her room. We both didn't hesitate now, and I reached for my phone to call the police. After trying to explain the situation to the operator on the other end, in tears the whole time, she told us a unit was being dispatched and to stay where we were. As we were still crying and hyperventilating, we heard a phone ringing. It sounded like an old landline phone, one with a harsh and loud beeping. It was coming from the landlord's mansion. We waited silently, listening to the drawn-out ringing of his phone. After what felt like 2 minutes, it stopped, and we heard his voice talking to the operator. At that time, we both noticed another thing. Fingerprints on her window. These windows were slanted glass that you could open up with a lever. Whoever left those prints reached up, cupped their hand around the top of the glass, and dragged their fingers on the dust. It wasn't there before. Soon, the landlord walked to the mother's unit and told her that the police called him. He seemed extremely upset and told her that he made sure that they didn't send a unit. Her mother came into her room, and we explained the situation. Both the landlord and her mother didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that a man just tried to enter our room. I couldn't stay the night, and neither could my friend. We were both too scared to spend another minute there. I called my mom and she came to get us at about 11 or 12. We dropped my friend back the next day, and when we got there, her mother told us something that I couldn't pass off as a coincidence. The night that this happened, it had been raining, and there was a strong wind, but not strong enough to do this. Next to her mother's unit, she had a pole that held beads and fairy lights. During the night, right after her and I were picked up, it had been knocked down. Keep in mind, this pole was literally embedded in cement and tied to other items with zip ties. There's no way it could have been the wind. That pole was sturdy. I'm still unsure of an explanation to all of this. It may have been her landlord. I'm not too sure. It could have also been her stepfather, who was pretty insane. Either way, to the man, or whoever it was, who tried to break into our room, please, let's not meet again. It was my day off, and my husband was traveling for work. I just came upstairs after running on the treadmill, which we keep on the ground floor where the garage is. I came upstairs and was about to hop into the shower, but on my way up I saw these two plastic skeletons I bought for Halloween. The plan was to hang them up on the awning so it looked like they were sitting on our front balcony. It was a bit dirty out there, so I decided to put them up before I got into the shower. So I was outside in a sports bra and leggings only. I had to bring the chair from the dining room outside so that I could reach the top of the awning. There were hooks for hanging up plants there, so I was using said hooks to hang the skeletons. The door to my house was ajar while I was doing this. I was done hanging them up and adjusting their poses when a woman came running up the stairs to our front door. To be honest, I was startled that there was a random woman on my porch that when she said, "I'm dying of thirst. I'm so thirsty. Can I have some water?" I went inside and grabbed a water bottle. We had recently had a box of bottled waters delivered, so they were just right inside. The woman followed me inside and I started panicking as I realized I was now inside the house with a strange woman. There's a lot of homeless people and junkies in the neighborhood, but she was well dressed. Besides that, she was wearing a wool peacoat in 80-degree weather, which is odd. I'm a small person and she was probably a head taller than me and outweighed me by at least 30 pounds. She chugged a water bottle and started chatting with me as if we were old friends. She asked me how long I had this house and where my parents were. I'm over 30, so that was a weird question. I told her my parents never lived here and then said, I have to leave soon, so you better get going, and literally shoved her out the door. I texted my husband who was overseas and he could see the ring camera that she left the property. He kept asking why I let her in. Honestly, I'm not sure why, but I also didn't expect her to follow me inside. So, strange woman from the sidewalk who just came into my house. Let's not meet. So this one time, I was playing with my toys in the basement of my parents' house. I was around 6 years old, so this happened in 2011. For context, at this time the house was not fenced, and it happened a few times that people just walked through my garden to access the field behind my house. So this could be not unusual, but wait for it. After eating dinner, my parents would let me play with my toys for a little while, since it was Halloween vacation. I can't say for sure what time it was, but it was definitely after 7 p.m. because I remembered that it was already dark outside. While I was playing, I heard a noise coming from, I thought at the time, the boiler room that was behind me. It usually makes noises, so I continued to play without even thinking about it. The door of the boiler room was closed like always. It was always closed, or else you could smell it through the whole house. Anyway, I continued serving plastic food to my non-existent clients in my non-existent restaurant. Then I heard another noise. That time I turned around to see what made the noise and where it came from, but nothing. The door to the boiler room is still closed like it's supposed to. I was confused, but didn't worry more than that and continued playing until I heard a knocking coming from the window facing me. There was a man standing there looking at me. The guy had his head between the bars of the window, and still to this day I could recognize him even if it happened 15 years ago. He was wearing this 90s Nike jacket and a faded blue cap. He had a 2-day-old beard and he looked like he was very tired. I remember him having massive dark circles under his eyes. His expression was neutral when I noticed him. After a few seconds, I ran upstairs to my parents, telling them what I just saw. My dad immediately ran down to the basement. He grabbed a hammer and got out ready to attack the guy if needed, but the guy had disappeared into the darkness. My dad went to drive around the small village I live in to look for him, but we never saw him again. We believe he probably ran through the fields behind my house. These events honestly traumatized me. I was having a lot of nightmares, dreaming of this almost every night for a while. I had night terrors because of this, and to this day I'm still terrified when I'm in the basement. It just gives me the chills and makes me want to run upstairs as quickly as I can. So man, through the window, if you read this, thanks for scaring the shit out of me. I hope you had fun watching me play. This was some years ago when I was living in a different city. I hadn't really been on my own all that long, and my housing situation fell apart at the last minute, so I had to scramble to figure it out. Meaning, you guessed it, random roommates. Now, the year before, I had a random roommate that was an amazing person and ended up becoming a great friend. So I figured this would be the same. It was not, but actually, that's not the focus of the story. Enter roommates, Ben, who I did actually know a bit from the previous year and was becoming friends with, Tom, and Mike. Now, this was the very first couple of days after moving in, and we all hung out to get to know each other a little better, but Tom and Mike hadn't fully moved in yet. It was a big old house, separated by floor, and the top level locked at the stairs. This is important to note. Ben and I lived upstairs and Tom and Mike downstairs. I've always been paranoid and definitely have a good reason. So when I'm home, all the doors are locked. And when I leave, all the doors are locked. I sleep with my bedroom locked. I was home alone. Ben was at work, and Tom and Mike sort of in and out moving stuff in. I'll note here that both had a lot of expensive stuff, like in the 5-figure range. Well, I was watching something on my laptop in my room, bedroom locked, and both entrances to my part of the house locked. I start hearing a lot of noises coming from downstairs, sounding like the doors of the cupboards opening, furniture moving, etc., and figured it was just Tom or Mike, until I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I was technically supposed to be somewhere at the time, which they knew, but it canceled last minute, so no one would have known I was home, and they would have no reason to come upstairs when they both knew I was supposed to be gone. That's when I got panicky. Hearing them come closer and closer to the top of the stairs, I never sat so still. Then the knob started to jiggle. I could hear it clearly as my room was closest to the entryway. At this point, I'm on the phone with 911 whispering that someone was in my house, without giving away that I was there to whoever it was. The house was super close to downtown and the cops arrived there in minutes, but they were the longest of my life at that moment. The downstairs was completely ransacked, like something out of a movie. It was so surreal to see. They had taken over $20,000 in electronics, broken furniture, plates, and stuff, even ripped through the mattress. Turned out Tom and Mike had left the door unlocked while moving. This would not be the last time before I fled the house. The intruder was gone before the cops showed, so I spent the next several months afraid that they would come back, though it would turn out to be the least of my future worries. So glad that I always locked doors. Considering the way the downstairs looked, I don't know what they would have done to me. To whoever was on the other side of that thankfully locked door, let's not meet. This happened last night. I was almost home after a long day of traveling, and it was approximately 1 a.m. as I rounded the corner and stopped at the intersection right near my home. The light was red, and as I slowed to a stop, out of the corner of my eye I saw these people on the sidewalk. They were all dressed in black and wearing white face masks or face paint, maybe a combination of the two. One was crouched on the ground while the other two were standing crooked. They were still like statues when I came to a stop, but when I looked at them, they all started crawling and walking towards me. I was exhausted, and apparently my instincts in that moment of terror is to just laugh and shake my head like I was in on the joke. They were super close to my car, but thankfully the light turned green, and I was able to get out of there before they reached my car. Since you could see the corner of my house from the intersection, I ended up driving for quite a while, and then turning back around once I felt like enough time had passed, so that they didn't follow my car pulling into the street I live on. I imagine it was just some teens playing a prank, but afterwards I was thinking about it being a school night, and most people wouldn't be having sleepovers in the middle of the week. I'm debating on if it's worth calling the non-emergency line to report it just in case. Regardless, I won't be going out past sundown for quite some time, and I'll likely invest in some door lock reinforcements. Disclaimer: I don't think all homeless people are scary, or bad intentioned, or creepy. I do think this encounter with this homeless person was creepy, however. This happened in 2019. I was 25 at the time. I was living with my parents, sister, and my partner at the time. We were saving up to buy a house. My parents' house was in a relatively big city in California, which has a big homeless population. This house was on the street that dead ended to a park, which was a common hangout spot for homeless people. There were always homeless people walking by our house. Most of them never caused any problems. There's another piece of backstory you need to know, and it's my sister is special needs. She, despite being 19 at the time, appeared both physically and mentally more like a 10-year-old. This particular day, my mom had taken their dogs to the vet. My partner was at work. My dad was working in the backyard. This left my sister kind of alone in the house. When my mom and I came back from the vet, my sister opened the door and greeted us saying, "This is my friend Julia." Behind her stood a woman who looked like she was probably in her 20s. She had my sister's socks on and was eating food from our house. This was confusing because the woman could have been friends with my sister, as she was in a lot of programs for adults with special needs, and we didn't necessarily know all of her friends. But my sister also has a limited vocabulary to explain situations with. So my mom says, "Oh, you know my daughter? We're getting to know each other." "How are you getting to know each other?" "Oh, well, I live on the corner." "You live around the corner?" "No, I live on the corner. I needed a tampon, so your daughter let me in." At this point, my mom was speechless. I'd never seen her speechless in my life. I whispered to her, "Get her out." Julia is kind of pacing around, grabbing more food from our kitchen. She's acting erratically, as if she's on drugs. I again tell my mom, "Get her the fuck out." My mom says, "I know that, but what if she has a knife or gun or something? I need to do it carefully." My mom follows Julia into the kitchen and says, "I'm so sorry, you need to leave now because I need to go run an errand." Julia ignores her request. At this point, I look into the bathroom where there's a pile of Julia's things. Again, my mom tells her that she needs to leave. Julia agrees and then goes into our bathroom and locks the door. She was in there for a while. It felt like forever, but it was probably around 5 minutes. We were pretty certain that she was doing drugs. Finally, Julia has all her stuff and leaves, taking socks and snacks with her. I run to get my dad and we all debrief. It seems like what we could get out of my sister was that Julia knocked on the door asking for a tampon, in which my sister lets her in, trying to be helpful. Julia realized that she was practically alone with what looks like a child and takes full advantage, stealing clothes and shoes from us. We have a serious talk with my sister and tell her that she can never open the door for strangers. We spend the next few months worrying that Julia would spread the news that our house was an easy house to get into. I'm at my parents' house for the summer. All the lights were off and the cars were missing from the driveway, despite 4 people being in the house. It's 7:30 at night, raining, and a black truck pulls up into the driveway. A young guy in normal clothes, black hoodie and sweatpants, knocks on the door. My 8-year-old sister answers the door, with their big dog barking upstairs. They asked her 3 things. "Are your parents home? Can we hunt the deer on your property? Do your parents want to come hunting with us?" She says yes, that her parents are at home, and goes to get our dad. The weird thing is, there is no deer ever on our land, and it's not deer season. My dad comes down to talk to them, and they switch up their story. Now they're saying that they want to hunt turkeys that are on our property. We do have turkeys sometimes wandering around our property, but not today. They told our dad all about the guns they had in their trunk, and there were many. They tell us how they came here from Alabama to hunt. They then asked if they can hunt on what's clearly our neighbor's property. My dad sent them away, but they drove by our house a couple more times after that. I don't know if this is that strange in New England, but from where I'm from, it definitely is. Also, it could just be my theater mind being overdramatic like always, but I thought might give it a shot. Worst case, I write a cool horror story based off of this encounter. I'm a 41-year-old female. I live in Montana, and a few years ago I was forced to relocate after my landlord decided to rent to her son. The community I had lived in for 11 and a half years had become incredibly expensive. Unfortunately, I was forced to relocate to another city, and because of this unexpected move and associated costs, I had to move in with a roommate. My roommate left to pursue better job prospects about 3 months after I moved in. Our unit was a triplex, so there were two gentlemen who inhabited the other two units. I was never added to the lease as the property manager required a full deposit, and I was not in a financially healthy spot at the time. I remained in the unit for a year and a half on my own, paying rent and utilities. I became very good friends with the man in the unit closest to mine. We'll call him Devin, a 52-year-old male. Devin was a disabled veteran in recovery. I also am a veteran, so he held a soft spot in my heart. We shared meals, hung out, and discussed all of life's mysteries, and would look out for one another. Devin had gone to treatment for 6 weeks, and I watched his cat while he was gone. Our friendship developed over the course of 1.5 years. Devin had expressed romantic interest. However, right from the beginning, I had clearly informed Devin that I did not share those feelings, and we would never be more than just good friends. Devin seemed to be lonely, which made sense. However, I am a person who requires alone time to recharge my batteries. I would catch him walking through the front yard multiple times a day to get the mail, which I believed was to see if I was outside so he could stop and chat. When I'd leave in the morning to go to work, Devin was always outside to tell me that I looked nice and have a good day. I told him that made me feel uncomfortable, and he should just send a text letting me know that he wanted to hang out and wait for a response. There were a couple times I yelled at him for overstepping my boundaries. The first, I had just got home and pulled into my garage. I was on a phone call and stayed in the car. Devin looked through the garage window to see if I was home. I was annoyed, but didn't really think too much of it. The second, I was getting dressed in my room in the summer, so the window was cracked. I felt this was safe as the window was not placed that anyone should be walking by, as it was on my patio on the back of my home. I caught Devin peeking through it. I lost it. I let Devin know under no certain terms his behavior was appropriate, and that if he didn't respect my boundaries, we would no longer be friends. Last year, while I was still at home, I asked Devin to watch my dogs for a couple days so I could go to a family event out of state. Devin was happy to help, and I was very appreciative. Not long after I returned, I started to notice strange things in my home, but I really just thought it was me. For instance, it was fairly certain that I had locked the door in the morning when I left for work, but when I returned, it would be unlocked. I would be sure that I had shut off all the lights, but when I got home in the evening, one would be on. I really just thought it was absent-mindedness. Fast forward a couple months. My mom became sick with cancer. My sister watched my dog while I went to tend to my mom. My sister reached out to me and asked me if anyone else had a key to the apartment. I let her know that she had the only spare key, and asked why. She said she experienced the same issues with the lights and locks. I had not shared my concerns with my sister prior to her communicating hers with me, as I really doubted my own sanity. While I was out of town, I received a text message from Devin asking if I had a potato he could borrow. I let him know that I was out of state with my mom, who was sick. Devin did not reply, which was out of character, but I had noticed a change in Devin's affect. He was more reserved and less friendly towards me. I thought it had to do with my firm adherence to my boundaries, which was okay. He didn't have to like them, just respect them. When I got back to town, one night, I stayed over at my sister's house after helping her move. As mentioned above, I was struggling financially, so I would carefully budget and plan my weekly meals. The morning before my sister's move, I had placed 3 pieces of bacon in a Ziploc to be used later for a BLT. When I returned the following morning, much to my belief, there were only 2 pieces of bacon. I held the bag in my hands knowing that there had been 3. No longer did I doubt myself. I called my sister and let her know that someone had been getting into my house that I always kept locked. The only logical thing that could have happened is Devin made a copy of my key when he was watching my dog in the fall. My sister reminded me of the potato text. The potato in the counter basket was gone. I had enough information to be certain my neighbor has violated my trust and was no friend. However, I still wasn't afraid of him. As I mentioned, he is a disabled vet and was somewhat feeble and sickly. I was not scared of confrontation. I immediately went to a hardware store, purchased a camera that streams to your phone once the motion detector has been activated. I placed it facing the side door where Devin would enter. It also has two-way audio capability, so my plan was that when Devin decided to enter my home again, I would see it and say over the camera something to the effect of, "Get the fuck out of my house, put the key you copied on the counter, and never try to speak to me again, or I will contact law enforcement." As I wrote above, I was not on the lease and did not want to be homeless, so I could not turn to the property manager for help, and Devin knew it. In the evenings, I started placing a jug of cat litter and a kitchen chair in front of the door that I knew Devin was accessing, but I never expected he would attempt to come in while I was at home, and really, he had only taken a piece of uncooked bacon and a potato. Laying on the couch one night, watching TV, I thought I heard something sliding on the floor in the laundry room where the door was, but I knew there was no way that he would come in while I was home. My cat was running around playing, so I decided that it was probably just her, and that I was just being paranoid because of all that had happened. The next morning, while changing my laundry, I noticed the litter and chair had been pushed 3 to 4 inches. I checked the sensitivity of the camera and found that I was able to replicate by slowly opening the door. Devin had tried to come in while I was home. Why? That morning, I took bear spray into the shower with me while my knees knocked. I was terrified. I felt vulnerable and violated. Devin knew that I knew now also. He knew that I had placed a barrier in front of the door. After that morning, he never was outside in the morning, nor did he walk through the yard to get his mail. I obtained a firearm for protection and did make a police report. The police officer was annoyed with me as I didn't want them to approach Devin, as all Devin would need to do is report me to the property manager, and I would be homeless. I'm grateful that whatever he was up to was apparently prevented. The fact that he tried to come in when he knew I was home gives me the heebie-jeebies. I wonder if he went through my underwear, watched me while I slept. Since then, my situation has greatly improved. I ended up moving shortly after to take care of my mom. I got my own place again a few months ago. I never put my trust into another neighbor for a pet or house sitting again. It still blows my mind that I had some douchebag stealing from me and likely stalking me. This story just solidifies one should always trust their gut. There were so many times that a red flag was screaming, and I thought I was just being crazy. Recently, I was having some trouble with kids knocking on my door and running. I have severe PTSD, so this was causing me some issues at home. I was in contact with a police officer in the area who my mother knew. We met up at a coffee shop to discuss what I could do to make myself feel safer. This was going fine until my mother brought up an old story about when our house was broken into. My memory of this is waking up at Christmas and only having one thing because everything was taken. I was too young really to remember it, but I'm 35 and not one person has ever spoken to me about it since childhood, so I always thought my version was correct, except it really wasn't. What actually happened was, my mother woke up in the night having heard a noise. She knew there were burglars in the area because my uncle next door has had his Christmas presents stolen. This is where I confused myself. She got up in the dark and went to the next door to my room to pick me up. I was around 2 years old and was wide awake, just standing up in my cot, wide-eyed. My mom flicked on the lights and said something about a man. She was freaking out. We were alone in the house, and when she looked down, she saw little patches of burnt carpet and spent matches. They had came in through the downstairs, lit matches and just dropped them, still lit, while they were walking around. She could follow the entire trail from the back of the house to my room. Back to the present. I'm staring at my mother in the coffee shop, coffee halfway on my face, and she's like, "What?" I said I did not recall this. I recall something else. Told her quickly and she was like, "No, that's your uncle. We nearly died in a house fire." I had an existential crisis right there because I've been deadly afraid of fires my whole life, to the point of night terrors as a little kid with no explanation. Now I get it. Last night, I woke to an unsettling noise of loud banging and my dogs frantically barking. Living alone with my girlfriend, we had grown accustomed to our neighbors' domestic disputes, and I have to call the police often. I stumbled to the bathroom, as the walls there are thin and separate our duplex from theirs. As I approached the bathroom door, the entire house was dark, and a tall shadow was in the bathtub. I wasn't wearing my glasses. I'm incredibly nearsighted, so I struggled to discern whether the shadow was merely the shower curtain or what it was. Then the shadow spoke. I don't know what he said, but the gut-wrenching panic is still fresh. I screamed and fled back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My girlfriend, now awake and terrified, joined me as I dialed the police. They instructed me to lock the door, but my bedroom doesn't have one. With a banging growing louder and more aggressive, I braced myself against the door, praying that help would arrive in time. To my relief, the police arrived swiftly, in only 5 minutes. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, I found that they had dragged him, naked, from the bathtub because he had been trying to take a shower. They were questioning him on my couch while he was handcuffed. He was incredibly drunk and had wandered into the wrong house. The one night I forget to lock the doors. But to the drunk, naked stranger who saw me squinting at him, pantless, in the dark, let's not meet. I'm a 36-year-old male. My parents divorced when I was 4 or 5 years old. During and after the divorce, my brother, let's call him Chris, my mom, and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment townhouse. Now, this was not the nice townhouse you may imagine. It was a complete shithole per se. They were older, built in the 1960s. This was in the 1990s, and is in a rougher part of town. Something a single mother with 2 kids could swing. The layout to the apartment is important to the story, so bear with me. When you walk in the front door, the kitchen is immediately to your left, and there's a short entrance hallway in front of you. The kitchen is an open countertop area that looks into the dining spot for a table, and a split-level living room den area that also had a sliding glass door that leads to the backyard. No fence for privacy, where there was a rather sad and sparse playground. In the hallway entrance again, on the right is a staircase that leads up to all of our bedrooms. One day after school, my brother and I are out playing in the backyard on the playground, doing our kid stuff, when my mom told us she wanted to go check the mail. The mailboxes for the apartments are located in the front entrance, which is on the opposite side of the complex from us. Naturally, me being 5 and Chris 9, my mom didn't want to leave us alone, especially since it was about to get dark outside. We came inside and got ready to leave. On the way out, I remember my mom asking Chris if he had closed and locked the sliding glass door. Chris said he had. Cut to when we were back from the mailroom. It's maybe been about 20 to 30 minutes max. It's hard to recall fully. My mom unlocks the apartment door. I'm lingering in the car for some reason or other. Chris doesn't notice I'm not in the apartment yet, and on the stairs leading to the bedroom on the right, he sees some feet disappear to the top of the landing, as if someone were running to hide. Thinking it was me, he didn't think anything was off. Chris goes into the kitchen, and I actually go upstairs directly into our bedroom to get ready for bed in the bathroom. My mom is at the table in the dining room area, near the split-level living area downstairs. While I'm completely clueless getting ready for bed in the bathroom, Chris from downstairs keeps hearing some noises walking around my mom's bedroom. Now, I had a bad habit at that age for going through people's stuff, not maliciously. I was barely 5, just curiosity. And Chris, thinking that I was being a nosy bastard going through all of my mom's jewelry, etc., runs upstairs to catch me in the act and get me in trouble. Chris runs up the stairs, sprints across the hallway to my mom's bedroom, and throws himself stomach first on the bed. When he looks up, he sees a tall, slender man with a bright green goblin latex Halloween mask on, and is holding a large knife he swiped from the kitchen. My brother sits silently in shock as the man in the mask raises a finger to his mouth, indicating for him to be quiet. And in the true form of my brother, he screamed bloody murder for my mom. At this point, I heard things going on, but I have no idea and am not aware of what's happening. I've gotten into my big oversized sleep shirt and am going downstairs to get a glass of milk before bed. When Chris screamed, the man ran downstairs and encountered my mom, who immediately jumped into action. Our baseball gear is near the living room, and my mom grabbed the bat and started fighting the man in our house while he's taking swipes at her with a knife. I first noticed what was happening when I came downstairs to the kitchen, pulled up a stool to reach the counter to pour a glass of milk, and that's when I see over the bar the guy push my mom off the step into the split-level living room, landing on her back. She starts swinging the bat wildly, trying to make contact with it, and she does. I'm glued to the image, truly frozen in place, not scared, just so young that I can't fully process what I'm seeing. The man finally runs towards the front door, which is right next to the kitchen. I'm mid-pouring my glass of milk, frozen, milk continuing to spill all over the counter and floor. He stops and turns directly to me, and in that green goblin mask with a knife, screams a primal, deep sound of rage and frustration, and then slams the door so hard the whole place shakes. I continue standing on the stool, pouring milk everywhere, frozen for what could have been seconds, but felt so long. I don't remember what happened after that, but all the parts that I've relayed are very clear to me. Moral of the story, lock your doors, and don't just assume that you did. And dear man in the goblin mask, let's not meet again. Before I start, I must say that I haven't told many people about this, mostly because it was a very scary experience for me. This happened in Kelowna, Canada in the 80s. I'm male and was about 14 and was babysitting at the neighbor's house while the parents were gone. They had a nice house, like most in the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner where 2 streets connected. My house was right outside a bus stop, across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night in the winter, so it was dark out, maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on the couch when I thought I saw something out the back door. It was one of those glass doors that leads to the porch. It was weird though, because I couldn't see much. You know when the lights are on inside and it's dark out, so you can't see anything but black and your reflection. That's what I saw. But I could have sworn it looked like someone was out there, so I got up and walked to close the windows. It definitely looked like there was something there, but I still couldn't see. I got closer, still couldn't see. I honestly should have just turned on the outside lights, but instead, I put my face up to the glass, cupped my hands by my eyes to look out. Maybe about 1 inch from my face on the other side of the glass was a man. He looked tall and pale from what I could see, which wasn't much. And he was staring at me, very scary. Keep in mind, he would have been watching from the backyard. Naturally, I jumped back and let out a short scream, but stupid teenager me didn't call the cops. I called my parents instead. My father came over to take a look. there were still footprints in the front and backyard. I don't remember much after that because it just felt like a very unreal experience. You never expect that stuff to happen until it does. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the story because I sure didn't enjoy experiencing it.